Transistor Radio.
You are listening to Transistor Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Franz. My website is ageoftransitions.com. Please visit ageoftransitions.com to subscribe to this podcast. There's an RSS feed, easy ways to subscribe through iTunes. I have the link there for you on the website. There's also a link to Stitcher Radio. You can subscribe through that with your mobile device. And you can download every episode directly from ageoftransitions.com. So save them, archive them, share them with others. I hope that you do that. You can use the audio any way that you like. You can make your own projects out of them. You can make videos out of them and repost them to YouTube or whatever other video site you might want to use. Feel free to do so. I encourage it, actually. And thank you very much to listeners. And thank you even more for spreading the word and recommending the show to others. Transistor Radio has been doing well recently, and I'm very excited. I'm going to continue producing it. It's been good. And as I always say, there's a new episode every Tuesday or Wednesday. So check the podcast feed Tuesday or Wednesday. You'll get a new one with a new interview with a great guest or another just solo show where I go and talk about any given endless amount of topics, because there's a lot of topics that interest me on this show that I deal with. Today on Transistor Radio, I'm doing another installment of book notes. So last time I did this, went over my notes for the Lord of the Rings series by Tolkien. And today I'm getting back to nonfiction, as I promised I would. There's quite a few books that I've read, very good books out there. So basically what I'm wanting to do here is just share my notes so that if anybody wants the abridged versions of these books, they can just kind of use these shows as reference. And that being said, I want to recommend all the books that I do on these shows. I actually recommend that if you're able to, get a hold of them yourself and read them if you really want to get in depth with it. And because there's a lot of notes that I just don't have, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't write down. And if you want to get more out of it, obviously, I do recommend all these books because they're all good ones. So what book am I going to go over today? Well, that would be Fire in the Minds of Men by James H. Billington. This is a well-known book in alternative research, especially cited very frequently. I'm sure that listeners will be familiar with this book. James H. Billington was, I'm not sure if he still is, but he was the Librarian of Congress, so a very prestigious author here. High credentials there. And this is a book primarily about revolution and the revolutionary faith. So it is of keen interest of mine because I like to deal with revolution as a broad topic in my book, Revolve Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood. I get into revolution quite a bit. And I'd like to also focus on it in this podcast as well, because it's an important thing in our day, this revolution, understanding the roots of revolution here is what we're going to get into with Fire in the Minds of Men. So we're going to understand what revolution is quite a bit better by reading this book. And I also want to note that I'm going to be reading direct quotes from this book. The direct quotes are property of the publisher. The publisher that I have here is Transaction Publications. So, it's owned by the copyright owner, the author, the publisher. I just want to say that, I'm putting this podcast out for educational purposes. And, that's what I'm doing here. I just do want to note the fact that I know that it's copyright material. And I will be reading some quotes here. So, Fire in the Minds of Men, Origins of the Revolutionary Faith by James H. Billington. A note from page 3, this is a direct quote. Origins of a Faith. perhaps the faith of our time. Modern revolutionaries are believers, no less committed and intense than were the Christians or Muslims of an earlier era. Okay, so Billington's saying that this is a religion, a revolutionary religion. Okay, I have a note, belief in perfect secular order. That's a quote, perfect secular order. That's the goal of this religion, is to achieve that. Leaders of this faith were intellectuals. They were an elite group, so an intelligentsia. That's how this revolutionary faith works. They're an intelligentsia. Quote, revolutionary faith was shaped not so much by the critical rationalism of the French Enlightenment, as is believed, as by the occultism and proto-romanticism of Germany. Okay, so, on the surface, it seems like it just came out of France and the French Enlightenment and all that. Billington's saying, no, look to the occult tradition that came out of Germany for the origins of this revolutionary faith. Page 5, another direct quote. The heart of revolutionary faith, like any faith, is fire. Ordinary material transformed into extraordinary form. Quantities of warmth suddenly changing the quality of substance. Highly occult charged quote right there. Billington is a man who understands the occult tradition and the symbolism of the occult meanings behind many symbols. So here he's talking about the importance of fire, the symbolic significance of fire in the occult sense, and how that relates to the revolutionaries here, and how fire is really their symbol, their element. The one important element of the four elements is fire, for good reason. And I won't get too much into the occult now. Again, I will make note that I'm going to be doing a series on the occult mystery tradition coming up, Under the Sun series. So stay tuned to Transresistor Radio for that. I'm sure I'll get into fire in more depth there. Okay, but anyway, still on page 5. I just have a note that says to read The Possessed by Dostoevsky. It illustrates this idea of fire. So there's another book for all of you out there that you might want to read to learn about how fire relates to revolutionary faith. Dostoevsky's The Possessed. Page 6, quote, some European aristocrats transferred their lighted candles from Christian altars to Masonic lodges. The flame of occult alchemists. Okay, going on, quote, still, seeking to recreate a golden age, Bavarian illuminists conspiring against the Jesuits, French Philadelphians against Napoleon, Italian charcoal burners against the Habsburgs. Okay, so you have these revolutionary groups fighting against the establishment in their respective territories here. Yeah, and they're talking about how some aristocrats kind of shunned the establishment themselves to more intensely pursue their Masonic interests. So the relationship between the establishment and Masonry is a very interesting relationship, to say the least, because in one sense it's anti-establishment Masonry, but in another sense it ties to a lot of people who are in the establishment. I don't know. Let's see if we can learn more about that by reading this book further. Another note. General Claude Francois Mallet, quote, with a match... Oh, okay, this is a quote from General Claude Francois Mallet. Quote, with a match one has no need of a lever. One does not lift up the world, one burns it. Okay, that's a great quote that illustrates the idea here, is that the revolutionary is not building. His job is more so in burning down, in the destruction phase, the alchemical phase of dissolution here. And he uses fire to destroy. So fire can create by destroying, actually. That's an occult idea too. So that's what's going on here, and that's a very interesting quote there. Okay, another note. Prometheus is the model for revolutionaries. You've got the concept of the new day, the solar myth of revolution. Quote, suggesting that the sun was rising on a new era in which darkness would vanish forever. The ideal was not the balanced complexity of the new American Federation, but the occult simplicity of its great seal, an all-seeing eye atop a pyramid over the words Novus Ordo Seclorum. Okay, then I wrote, looked back to pre-Christian era and pagandom. So there's the ever-popular all-seeing eye symbolism from the back of the dollar bill there that he's mentioning. The solar myth, Prometheus as the model for revolutionaries. More fire, symbolism of the eye, occultism. Okay, now we're on page 7. The term communism was not invented by Rousseau, but by an and this is quote, by an indulgent fetishist and nocturnal streetwalker in pre-revolutionary Paris, Restif de la Bretonne. And I'm sorry for my French pronunciation. I know it's terrible. I'm not well familiar with the French language, so sorry about that, everybody. But yeah, this is an interesting note. This guy, Restif, who is kind of like a vagabond street person in one sense, but he was also a revolutionary publishing type of guy. Very interesting character. He actually came up with the term communism, and Billington gets more into him later, so we'll read more about him later. Very interesting character, this Restif. Okay, revolutionaries created many terms which are commonly used today. Even speculated on the year 2000 before the futurists. They were talking about cybernetics and stuff. And again, that Restif guy got very much into this. So he was talking about not only communism before it was a big subject, he was not only talking about revolution and calling for it, but he was talking about transhumanism way back in his day. And he was talking about all the same stuff that the transhumanists talk about. And this is one of the founders, in a sense, really, of this revolutionary faith. A very ignored person in history, and a very unlikely person. Not a person of high stature, certainly, but an important person nonetheless. And the link between revolution and revolutionaries and transhumanism is a very important one. And this is a very good note on that right here, I would add. Page 15, quote, Paris overthrew the mightiest monarchy in Christendom in 1789 to 1792. Another note, 1830 to 1848, quote, new waves of revolution. Page 16, quote, seen from above, the revolutionary tradition is a story of elite intellectual leaders. Okay, the idea of revolution built up long before the actual fact of revolution, so you got to build up the idea first. Quote, the return of a moving object to its place of origin, particularly the movement of celestial bodies around the earth. So that's what revolution is. It's going around in a circle to return in the end at your original starting point. Very important, very simple thing when you think about what the word revolution means, but it's a very important thing to sit back and contemplate and think of the broad implications on. Again, this is how the occult tradition works. You think about very simple things in a complex manner, and then you, in doing so, you learn quite a bit about the world that you live in. You gain much more understanding by doing what is actually quite a simple thing, but you just have to think to take the time to do it in the first place. Okay. Revolution back to a more natural order. That's a quote. A more natural order. So looking back to the past in one sense. Frederick the Great gave new connotation to revolution, influenced many Germans of his day. Quote, he created in Prussia a sense of new Promethean possibilities. Okay, end quote. Revolution of the human mind. These ideas brought to France by Count Mirabeau. He used religious words to describe political actions. Okay, very interesting, is it not? The religious side to political action, sort of turning political action into religion is what this revolutionary faith is about. French Revolution took place in a span of 5 months, May to October 1789. King dismissed Finance Minister Necker, and the mob hung his successor. They were very upset about that. Marquis de Lafayette took military control of Paris in July. He served with Mirabeau as revolutionary founding father. He was earlier wounded during the American Revolution. And he gets more into the Marquis de Lafayette and how he was not respected in his native France as he was here in America. So I'm sure we'll get into those notes later. King Louis XVI was guillotined in January 1793. French revolutionaries sought simplicity. They used slogans, uniform identity as citizens, the term one used heavily. That sounds a lot like the kind of stuff that goes on today, just using slogans for propaganda purposes to promote your revolutionary actions and get people to side with you. So, this propaganda is nothing new. It's always been used as a necessary tool to engage the angry mob and utilize it in your favor. Again, if your goal is to burn things down, burn society down, then the mob, which is unthinking mass, can be quite a useful tool to you. Usually it's regarded as an incredibly dangerous thing to be avoided, but hey, if you want to destroy things, it's the perfect tool to use. Let's see here. This is a quote. Violence was part of what revolutionaries sought and was in many ways their ultimate form of radical simplification. Another quote, revolutionary violence has been best described metaphorically as a volcanic eruption or the birth pain of a new order. That particular metaphor and that set of words specifically, birth pains or birth pangs of a new order, I've seen over and over again. I, in fact, have a short video on YouTube that I'll put in the show notes with various people from our day using those exact words. Henry Kissinger being one of them. There's another transhumanist guy whose name escapes me at the moment. But you'll find the birth pangs symbolism is very popular, especially these days, because we live in revolutionary times, and the connotation is that birth is actually a violent process in one sense. You got blood everywhere. It's painful for the baby and the mother, but it brings about new life. So through blood and pain and horrible mess, creation takes place. And that metaphor is used to legitimate revolutionary action in this sense. Okay, let's go on here. Where was I? That was a particularly important note in my mind there. For me, certainly, in the research I've done. So we've got the Palais-Royal. Again, my French pronunciation is probably way off there. It's in central Paris, this place. It was turned into galleries and exhibition halls, entertainment centers, and opened to the public in 1780s by Philip of Orleans. He was a royal character. It became a profitable center of pleasure, and that's a quote, profitable center of pleasure. Cafes and arcades and circus in the middle imitated the London coffee houses, but was more extreme. In Billington's explanations of this Palais-Royal and what's going on there, I kept thinking of Las Vegas. It was similar to that, not quite as extreme as that, more sort of on the, French Enlightenment, social, it still has that, like, revolutionary quality to it where the ideal is there of bringing about a better society at the very least, where Las Vegas is devoid of any purpose. It's just there for the pure pleasure side. But for some reason in my mind, I kept thinking of Vegas. And it is apt in many senses to do that. Okay, so July 12th, 1789, Camille de Moulin gave speech and riled up the crowd because of the king's dismissal of Necker. Okay, back to that incident that sort of spurred on the French Revolution. Again, people, one always wonders about these people who happen to get up and give the rousing speech like this. Okay, the Duke of Orleans brought new ideas to the power elite of the old regime. Okay, so this is another one of those aristocratic guys. The Duke of Orleans, very important in the French Revolution. He was a royal who, again, was more concerned with his Masonic sort of affiliations and bringing about revolution and social reform than he was about his own aristocratic royal status. He had a life's mission, and it was a revolutionary mission. That's why he opened up his Palais-Royal to the public and all the other things that he does around this time. Very interesting character, important historical character. Let's see here. Quote, royal ownership assured immunity from arrest within the Palais-Royal. Ah, yeah, I forgot about that. So because this Duke of Orleans owned the Palais-Royal, you couldn't be arrested in there. It sort of this immunity that comes with being a royal. So he used that where you could get away with doing things that you couldn't do anywhere else in there. Very interesting. Okay. All this gets the Duke in trouble later, as we'll learn. But let's see here. We're on about page 29 now. In September 1792, Philip of Orleans requested a new title, which that was that of Égalité, and that was his new title, Égalité, of course, referring to egalitarian, the ideal of the revolution here. He turned the Palais Garden into, quote, the Garden of Equality. He cited his Freemasonry as the influence to do this. His son defected to the counter-revolutionaries. So Philip Égalité was guillotined in 1793. Well, that's what I was talking about before. So he got in trouble for being a revolutionary. His Masonic quest did, in fact, get him killed. So let's see here. Pornography and prostitution were big at the Palais. Again, there's the Las Vegas sort of stuff going on. Okay, so one revolutionary faction were the Jacobins. They distrusted the Palais-Royal. In 1793, they led revolutionary dictatorship and curtailed the Palais-Royal's freedom. So they didn't like the revolutionaries in the Palais there. They had their own version of what they wanted revolution to be in France. The Jacobins did. Quote, illusion and fantasy mixed with material gratification and made the ideal of total secular happiness seem credible. Okay, very interesting quote I find there. So they're, just being hedonistic and indulging any worldly pleasure they can get here in the Palais. And in so doing, their ideal of this secular paradise, it concretizes in their mind as they're doing these debauch type activities. I don't know. I'm sure you understand what's going on there. I found that an interesting quote. Journalism took on new power. It's actually spread the ideas of revolution, and our modern sense of what we see journalism kind of came from this time and place there in France. Writers used profane language. This appealed to the masses They also felt liberated by its free use, rebelling against old taboos. Okay, so writers put out profanities and just lewd, crude material, and the masses just ate it up. And in so doing, the masses actually thought that they were being freed from the oppression of old taboos. So see, in actually becoming debauched, it's sort of like the free speech debate, what it's devolved into today in our society. We think because we can just say anything and be as crude and rude and obscene as we want to be and get away with it, we think that's freedom. See, just because we can do that, we think it's a good thing. We're not understanding what it is we're actually doing, and is it of any use to actually do that sort of thing. We're not thinking in that line. We're just thinking that we're liberating ourselves by pushing the envelope as far as we possibly can. I found it incredibly interesting that was going on during the French Revolution, because I saw a direct tie to what's going on now. I think I have more notes on that, so let's hope so. Let's go on here. Quote, Republic of Letters were an intellectual elite. Important group, the Republic of Letters. Ideal, quote, superior power, unquote, has right to, quote, universal surveillance, unquote, of unenlightened masses for the good of the revolution. Okay, so again, you get the intelligentsia believing that they have the right to just universally surveil the entire population in order to bring about the revolution. Made universal French language to destroy local dialects and unify the country. I had forgotten about this. So in France before this time, there were many local dialects that spoke very specific versions of French. They standardized the entire language so everybody spoke the same language. So through the use of language, you bring about a unification across a great distance. So just through manipulating language, you can do quite a bit in a revolutionary sense, in a political sense. Quote, many revolutionary leaders had been trained in rhetoric by the Jesuits and in oratory as prosecuting lawyers or preaching curates. Okay, so these guys had their backgrounds here. They're classically trained in rhetoric. That's a useful skill when you're getting up in front of an angry mob and giving a speech to them. Quote, social circle. Another intellectual elite within the Palais-Royal was this social circle. That was their name. Quote, Universal Confederation of the Friends of Truth. That's what they were. They had far-reaching progressive ideals. Typical revolutionaries. The social circle advocated feminism. Interesting. Feminism continues to be a revolutionary concept today. It was being put out there by the social circle in the French Revolutionary days. Bonneville was an important writer. His idea was the social circle was Bonneville's idea. So he's the guy who came up with this group. He was friends with Thomas Paine of American Revolutionary fame. Bonneville wanted to establish universal brotherhood, and the Jacobins were against him. Okay, so Masonic ideal there of universal brotherhood. You've got the opposing revolutionary group of the Jacobins, social circle working within the Palais-Royal. Bonneville is overlooked by historians. I have a personal note here that says his focus was on ideals and his actual historical impact is not clear to see. Aha, that's why he's overlooked by historians, because historians are looking so much for particular people, places, dates, actual tangible things that they can dig up, and they're not thinking about the ideals that spurred on the changes back in whatever time period you're looking at. They're not thinking about the ideals that spurred on the change so much. They do, but they overlook the power of that, and they overlook certainly the people who are behind the ideas and the ideals, because those people typically like to remain in the shadows anyway. They don't want to be known. They want their ideals to be known. It's not about them. That's the method that secret societies work by. They're not about getting applause for themselves. They just want to effectively spread their ideas and make them manifest in the world through alchemical means. And they're pretty successful in so doing. And that's how real power, I would say, actually operates, is that you don't see it. It emulates God, because God has ultimate power, but it's unseen, correct? And we're not going to get into great theological debate over what God might be, but let's just say that and understand what I'm saying there, and understand that human beings emulate that in the real world. That much is true. You can't convince me otherwise. Otherwise, I'll say that much. Okay, another note. And this is a direct quote. The press became and has remained the core of revolutionary counter-authority to modern political tyranny. Again, it's sort of started during the French Revolution and has persisted to this day. Remains very important. Dame Nature, worshipped by revolutionaries who opposed the church and king. So a sort of a pagan nature worship going on here among revolutionaries. Quote, secular counter-trinity, mother, which is nature, daughter, which is liberty, and Holy Spirit, which is popular sovereignty. You'll note that this trinity focuses on the feminine, where the traditional authority that was being rebelled against by revolutionaries would have taken the masculine version. It wouldn't have been mother, daughter. It would have been father, son, and Holy Spirit. This is mother, daughter, Holy Spirit of the revolutionaries. So again, that harkens back to the pagan religion, the old ancient religion that focused more on the feminine side than the later modern Western religious power structure did. Okay, so the tree of liberty became an important symbol. Trees actually are typically male themselves, or representative of male sexual power and whatnot. So anyway, let's see here. The guillotine was used ritualistically. It was placed in the public square. Quote, sacrificial altar. Very interesting. So you have a sacrificial altar, and we're quite literally talking about a death sacrifice going on in ritual fashion in public. So if you're talking about the death and rebirth of that occult practice, you're just talking about death here. And, well, again, let's not get too wrapped up in this. This is just one note here, but Billington just makes note that this was a ritual for the masses. Very interesting. Quote, this mass for the masses offered the certainty of blood sacrifice and the promise of collective redemption. Children given toy guillotines to kill birds. Can you imagine that toy in today's world? Oh, here, just put a little bird in this and chop off its head, and it's just something to think about. Like kids actually playing with toy guillotines. That's something else. Okay, so nature, capital letter N, of course, was the new focus of worship. Discussed this a moment ago. They made a new calendar. I would assume it would be based on the lunar cycle with 13 months. I can't remember how that worked out, but I just know that they made a new calendar. Okay, so Joel Barlow cited phallic worship in Liberty trees. There you go. Taken from Egypt. Osiris Bacchus is Liber. Quote, Barlow derived the Phrygian red cap of liberty from a Roman symbol for the head of the phallus. Okay, so you got phallic worship going on, again with the trees, old ideas from Egypt, Bacchus. Okay, yeah, again, I need to write a whole book to explain what's going on here. I'll also note that you should look forward to my Under the Sun series coming up soon to Transistor Radio if you want to learn more about the occult tradition. Another note, simple purpose of secular society explained as, quote, liberty, fraternity, and equality. Okay, and this is the famous slogan of the revolution that most people are familiar with. Liberty, fraternity, equality. A decidedly Masonic slogan there, with no surprise. Okay, quote, each of these three ideals had ancient origins, but each acquired a new mystical aura during this period. Political equals liberty, emotional equals fraternity, and intellectual equals equality. So you have a trinity here, of course. Again, very important, symbolically, occult symbolism here. Monarchy replaced by republic. Thomas Paine moved to France and became a citizen. Again, he's all about, his is a revolutionary life, so he's got to take up residence where the work is being done. Term nation was first used in its modern sense. Strasbourg, a lower Rhine city, was a conquest of France prior to the revolution. This city, quote, amplified and transformed the rising new French nationalism, end quote, adding in German ideas. Okay, so this Strasbourg city in particular was important for infusing the German occult ideas into the French Revolution. Germanic monarchs declared war on revolutionary France. So the monarchs there weren't happy about all this. They knew that they were being threatened by all this. Music was used to rally the people to arms and was very successful in so doing. The importance of art and theater, incredible importance, again to this day, used for revolutionary purposes. I personally plan on creating a large project, I'll just say, explaining this particular fact in great detail. So important. I will say that I'm working on something to explain that further. The importance of the stage and all that goes with that. Anyway, stay tuned to the podcast. I gotta keep saying that because really I'm going to be putting out a lot of material and I'm excited. I'll just do a little aside here and say that I am very inspired lately and I'm excited about not only the podcast but other projects. So I hope that listeners will stick with me. I appreciate you. As I've said over and over again, I really do. I want to let you know that I do feel inspired. I'm going to continue doing this. So look forward to that. I know I am. Ooh, here's an interesting note. Words like people were given capital letters. So the P in people, first letter, was capitalized. Quote, in the Germanic fashion. There you go. Okay, so pupil Roy, PR being capitalized. Okay, so that's an occult thing to do, is to capitalize certain things, and that has very distinct reason for doing that. Saint Just was very young. He was a member of the Committee of Public Safety. Oh yeah, here you go. Radical ideas. He condemned all government. Nature was the ideal. His vision of utopian society involved, quote, his concept of brothers in arms into quasi-erotic attachment. Pretty interesting that, you got these group of brothers who are fighting and, they get so involved in what they're doing that they end up having this intense love for one another. It turns into this homoerotic thing. That's pretty typical among these sorts of stories. Let's see here. So Schneider was given a hard time by Saint Just and Labat for engaging in distraction of sex and taking a German wife. He and his wife were executed in 1794. So that guy didn't, he wasn't part of the boys' club fully, and he was messing around with having sex with his wife. See, that's a distraction to these revolutionaries. That's just kind of an attachment to the previous note there about the homoeroticism and whatnot. This gets into the human psychological side of things, which I always find fascinating. It's always good to explore that side of things too. Let's go on to the next note. Female clubs and societies were banned in 1793. Worried about female participation in the revolution. Yeah, this is a boys' club for sure. Leave the men to this work. And I would add again that the work is destruction, something that men are adept at. When it comes to, if you were to put a man or a woman in charge of a demolition, the man would be the more natural choice. And that's just stating a fact of the matter. Men like to break things. I'm sorry, it's true. Okay, so anyway, let's go on. So, quote, the passion of Saint Just was cold rather than hot. It imploded into intelligence rather than exploding into indulgence. So Saint Just had a different sort of method to his revolution. That's quite a poetic quote. Billington's prose I found a bit difficult, to be quite honest, in reading this book. I found it hard to read, but he comes up with quotes like this that are just like, that are amazingly insightful and symbolic and with a lot of meaning. So he does pull out a lot of good ones from time and again, but I will note that I had difficulty reading the text overall. That's just a note about reading this book. Okay, so Saint Just sacrificed himself to a higher ideal. Quote, realize the goal of human regeneration. Okay, Saint Just was executed. His belief might have been, quote, the need for a tyranny of virtue to prevent the recurrence of tyranny surrounded by vice. Interesting. So his idea was, he was recognizing the fact that most people cannot control themselves and fall victim to all the vices that humans are just open to falling prey to. And his idea was to curtail that through this just enlightened tyranny, which would, kind of suppress the vices of the people in order to help the people. I find this akin to the transhumanist ideal of creating technologies to just delete bad habits and bad emotions, they say. Just deleting different parts of an individual's consciousness in order to better them through technology. So I found a correlation there. It's a revolutionary idea. It's a tyrannical idea, but one which is benevolent, at least philosophically speaking. Okay. Babeuf, another important guy. Babeuf led the new idea in opposition to that of fraternity, which was communitarian equality. That's a quote there. Similar symbols were used to promote both. So this is the communitarian word that we hear quite a bit of today. It's kind of coming back. This Babeuf guy, from what I know, was the one who came up with the term. So this is, again, a French revolutionary term, which is being brought out into the public mind today for new revolutionary purposes. A pretty important subject, as I like to harp on and on about, is the revolutionary faith that Billington is describing here, the history of revolution, how it actually works, and how it is in effect today in a big way. Quote, the revolutionary... wait a minute, hold on. Yeah, okay. Quote, the revolutionary egalitarianism of Babeuf, Marechal, and Restif de la Bretonne, that street person, is the progenitor of modern communism and of revolutionary socialism. Okay, so these guys, Babeuf, Marechal, and Restif de la Bretonne, very important in understanding modern communism and revolutionary socialism. Their ideas have morphed into what we know of those today, communism and whatnot. Important thing to realize. Abolishment of private property to maintain, quote, common happiness. The idea began early in this movement. Again, so the destruction of private property, well known as a communist concept. All government was reviled. Babeuf, quote, may everything return to chaos, and out of chaos may there emerge a new and regenerated world. Okay, so back to chaos, back to the original creation myth. So they used the creation myth as their template to recreate in the actual physical world. The French Revolution was only the beginning of a larger revolution. That was the concept they were working under. It's a large-scale project they wanted to initiate by making the French Revolution, getting that kicked off. Babeuf was arrested for his conspiracy in 1796. Okay, quote, few accepted Babeuf's egalitarian ideal, but many were haunted by his example, end quote. Some feared his conspiracy may have had foreign ties. International project here. Okay, so what's this say? Hupay, I think, Hupay, was inspired by Plato's Republic, the idea of communal public life. Quote, Spartan people, unquote, also referenced as a prototype for a new, quote, better race of men, an entire city of philosophers. Okay, Masonic ideal here is a communal public life where the entire citizenry is an enlightened population of philosophers and a better race. Certainly, yeah, that is gets into great detail, Plato's Republic, but here the revolutionaries are using that as an example. Restif had similar ideas and inspired Hupay. Restif invented term communism. Okay, this guy again. We're back to him again. Very important. Restif also advocated a future supranational community, which would be world socialism. Historians have ignored Restif and also possible link between he and Babeuf's conspiracy. Occult aspects of all this are also ignored. So again, this Restif guy deserves attention. Historians aren't paying attention to him, but they had ought to. One wonders if he's not brought out into public history so often for specific reasons. That could be a possibility. Okay. After Babeuf's trial, quote, the French Revolution in some sense ended. Those who sought to keep alive the high hopes of the early revolutionary era no longer focused their faith on the ongoing process of innovation in society as a whole, but instead retreated to the secure nucleus of a secret society where intense conviction need not be compromised by the diffuse demands of practical politics. Their myth of the unfinished revolution lent to such secret societies the special aura of an elect anticipating the second coming. Okay, I think that quote speaks for itself. Secret societies were dominant form of, quote, revolutionary organization, unquote, under Napoleon. History has been unable to document influence of secret societies. Yeah, because that's their method. They don't want to be known. They take every effort to remain in the shadows. And when they're not in the history books, then job well done. That's all part of their goal. That's what they're going for. They don't want to be explicitly mentioned anywhere. They just want their project to work out. Quote, the plain fact is that by the mid-1810s, there were not just one or two, but scores of secret revolutionary organizations throughout Europe, extending even into Latin America and the Middle East. These groups internationalized the modern revolutionary tradition and provided the original forum for the general debate in the modern world about the purposes of political power in a post-traditional society. Ooh, okay. I'm just making note of this note myself right now because that concept of the post-traditional society is an important one, and you'll find macro historians like Carol Quigley using that term post-traditional society in their writings. Very important concept. We're living in one right now. We're living perhaps towards the end of a post-traditional society, but anyway, more on this from me to come, let me tell you. Very important concept, I'll just say for now. Billington, quote, okay, this is a quote from Billington, obviously. Some of the quotes are from other people in here, but anyway, quote, modern revolutionary tradition grew out of occult Freemasonry. The real innovators were not so much political activists as literary intellectuals. Bavarian Illuminism in particular exerted great influence. There's that German influence again, German occult influence. Filippo Buonarroti, again, my Italian's not going to be very good either, sorry about that. Filippo Buonarroti, 1828, published, quote, History of the Babeuf Conspiracy. Okay, so a book about Babeuf, who we just talked about earlier. He recorded Babeuf's, quote, teachings and martyrdom, end quote. So he became a martyr in this book. That always helps your cause. Buonarroti, quote, the first apostle of a new religion, end quote. A full-time revolution. He was a writer. That was his main goal here in being a revolutionary. Quote, total dedication to the creation by force of a new secular order. And his writing of this Babeuf's story was all done to further the revolutionary cause, of course, turning him into a martyr, which is always an effective tool to make someone into a hero. Heroes are martyrs. Italy, the French... Oh, in Italy, French was the language of philosophy and progress for aristocrats. Buonarroti was, of course, an Italian himself. And, so they used French as the aristocratic language, the philosophical language there. The language of the intelligentsia, more or less. Okay, so Buonarroti was part of Babeuf conspiracy. He was sent to an island of... Oh, he was sent to the island of Ré, R-E, under scrutiny in 1806. In 1806, Napoleon allowed him to move to Geneva. He used Switzerland as a safe home base during his time there. Quote, he conceived of two successive secret organizations to command the international revolutionary movement, the Sublime Perfect Masters and Monde, M-O-N-D-E. End quote there. He's involved in resisting Napoleon. So, yeah, his relationship with Napoleon was tenuous. Probably deserves to be mentioned that he was never actually killed. He was just kind of exiled where he could continue his work. I'm not sure exactly why that might have been, but, I'm sure there's plenty of good reasons for it. Buonarroti, man, I'm really bad at that, pronouncing that. Buonarroti used Masonry as a template for his fraternal orders. He sought to work through existing Masonic lodges, to recruit through them, influence them, use them as a cover, and, if necessary, even undermine them. So, important within the revolutionary tradition is the taking advantage of secret societies and just using them for revolutionary purposes. So the concept that secret societies can be exploited, it certainly has happened in history and probably continues happening to this day to a great extent. So secret societies do have high ideals and, they want to do well, but they can be manipulated for other purposes. Essential revolutionary metaphor, quote, an architect building a new and better structure for human society. Certainly Masonic there. The natural example of cooperation for a greater cause. Freemasonry is, quote, a moral meritocracy. So, it's all based on your merits, your personal merits, where you get your degree in the society. That's the concept there. Philip of Orleans was the titular head of French Masonry, the Grand Orient Lodge. So there you go. He was the head of French Masonry there. And again, his Masonic ties became more important than his aristocratic blue blood ties. Quote, Masonry was deliberately used by revolutionaries in the early 19th century as a model and a recruiting ground for their first conspiratorial experiments in political organization. Buonarrote's organizational plan, quote, was simply lifted from the Bavarian order of Illuminists, end quote. Hierarchical structure of church, synod, and Areopagite. Okay, so those are different groups within the society. It was the church, the synod, and the Areopagite. Quote, the purpose of ascending the Illuminist hierarchy was not so much to attain wisdom as to be remade into a totally loyal servant of a universal mission. Cult. This was a cult. And yeah, that's an important note because typically being entered into a secret society, being raised to new life and all that is about it's about attaining wisdom and remaking the self. But this is more about the political mission. This is explicitly political goal. So using occultism and secret societies to carry out very specific political goals, which is not necessarily excuse me, what the occult tradition secret societies are about. They typically are wary of politics, but not here. So twisting things for a new purpose. And here we're on to Adam Weishaupt. Listeners should be well aware of who he is. Weishaupt tried to recruit, quote, commandos, end quote, from Masonic lodges. Called them commandos. Interesting. In 1780, his campaign spread through Germany, quote, and to the pseudo-knightly higher orders of Masonry. Okay, the higher orders, which are knightly chivalric orders, again, would be drawing from the aristocracy, I would note there. So Weishaupt was part of this occult political campaign. Certainly. Illuminists tried to discredit other more conservative secret orders. Okay, there you go. They even alleged that the Secret Observance Lodge was secretly controlled by the Jesuits. Okay, so they put out the idea that this one specific order of the strict observance was being controlled by the Jesuits in an effort to take them down. So these are opposed secret societies going on here. And I made the note that in turn the same has been done to Illuminists themselves. You'll find that the idea is put out there that the Illuminati is controlled by the Jesuits. So I don't know, if we're talking about returning from whence we came, the idea of revolution, that's going on a lot here again. And with that, dear listeners, I'm going to end today's podcast.